Welcome to the LearningShared podcast. Hello, my name is Alan Wood and I'm your host. Thanks very much for listening. So LearningShared is a space for anyone with an interest in supporting the needs of vulnerable learners in our society, including those with special educational needs and disabilities. We'll be hearing from and talking with a wide range of colleagues and stakeholders, including teachers, specialist practitioners, school leaders, researchers, as well as parents and carers. They'll be sharing creative, inspiring ideas, effective practice, and things they've learned along their journey. With that in mind, please get in touch if you'd like to suggest a topic for a future episode, or if you'd like to be involved in any way. You can visit us at www.learningshared.org or tweet us at _LearningShared. The LearningShared podcast is brought to you by Evidence for Learning and the EFL Send community. This is a growing community of teachers, practitioners, school leaders, researchers and academics that support children, young people and adults with special educational needs and disabilities, or indeed any form of additional learning needs. You can find out more about the EFL Send community and Evidence for Learning at www.evidenceforlearning.net. I hope you enjoy this episode. In this episode, we're returning to the recovery curriculum. We're joined by Matthew Carpenter and Professor Barry Carpenter, the co-authors of the original recovery curriculum think piece. In a conversation that was recorded on the 1st of May, Barry and Matthew reflected on the origins of the think piece. Matthew, who is the principal at Baxter College, a mainstream secondary school, shared his thinking behind the 5 levers and also shared the initial ideas that he and his team at the school had formed about how the recovery curriculum will be approached at Baxter College. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Morning.
Matt, could I ask you to kick us off by giving a short intro to your school, Baxter College, and also tell us a little bit about your personal career journey?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the principal at Baxter College. I've been there for 2.5 years. Before that, I've worked across the West Midlands in secondary schools, teaching science and leading lots of different things as you do in secondary schools in challenging circumstances, really. And then 2.5 years ago, I was lucky enough to join Baxter College at a school that really shares my values around a compassionate and empathetic approach to young people. And whilst it's not been a particularly easy 2.5 years, I've really feel honoured to lead a school of great kids and really good people. We're part of a trust that allows schools to run as schools, the Seven Academies Educational Trust. I should probably put them in. But we're given a lot of autonomy to take the care of our kids in the way that we think we should.
Thank you. And how has the adjustment experience of the last 5 weeks or so been for you and your staff and the students at the school?
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy. If you think about how much the school has had to change in such a short period of time, I think there's a lot of anxiety in those two communities that you described, really, that the whole community that the school serves, about infection, but also about each other and how they're doing. The loss of interaction, the loss of relationship is a real challenge for people, and I think particularly for the teaching staff at the moment, there's a real juxtaposition of they want to be back and they want to see the kids and they want to do their job, but also they're concerned about their health and the health of the kids in the community. So we've adapted well to online learning. I've learned a lot of things really quickly, but that's the kind of profession that we are. We learn.
Yes, I think the level and speed of adaptation, and actually just the lengths that schools and teachers have gone to in order to support their students through this crisis has been nothing short of inspirational, really, and outstanding. Yes. Now, I'd like to bring into the conversation Barry.
Good morning.
We thought it would be interesting to have the co-authors discuss between themselves firstly the thinking that led to the development of the recovery curriculum, and the notion of the 5 losses and 5 levers. And then in particular, looking forward to hear from Matthew, his thoughts on what the recovery process, and in particular the 5 levers, might look like at Baxter College, a mainstream secondary school. Barry?
Yeah, it's really a chance to reflect on where did the recovery curriculum come from, what's been its very short journey, because we've all been in lockdown now for 5 weeks, and this concept, this construct has been conceived and brought into reality within a very short space of time, within those few weeks. And Matthew, I was thinking back to our early conversations, and I was beginning to say to you how worried I was for the children, for all children, that what scars were they going to bear from this? What baggage were they going to carry? Because everyday children are listening to death tolls and what's happening in the NHS and our hospitals. And for some children, they will not actually have the cognitive ability, maybe even the language structures, to talk about that, to conceptualize what that means. And eventually I got to a point where I'd said to you one day, well, from all the reading I've been doing, there seems to be a major feeling of loss. And the 5 losses that are coming through most strongly were the ones about freedom, routine, friendship, opportunity, and so on. And within that, I think I mentioned then that the notion of recovery, and I think you jested with me, we ought to think of a recovery curriculum. The next I knew, because this was not my idea to write this up, I think you said, well, we should write this up. And I think I said, well, only if you'll do this with me, which is how we find ourselves in this position now. But when I'd written down the 5 losses and sent them to you and the evidence for it, you came back with the 5 levers. Do you want to sort of say where, in your thinking, those 5 levers came from, and that notion of levering children back into the position of an efficient and effective learner?
Yeah, I think you to have an optimistic outlook for the return to school, you have to strategize what you're going to do, and I think the levers came out of that. For me, the first route through all of this was thinking about the loss of relationship with the school, and we've expanded and extrapolated that a little bit. But I think I'm going to quote you here: education is a relationship-based profession. And for those young people, not having the relationships that they rely on heavily in school, the relationships with their friends, the relationships with their teachers, and the wider staff at the school, with that loss, I felt we had to facilitate that recovery. A 5-week break that we're looking at now, but we could be looking at so much longer. That there needs to be an opportunity, really, to restore that relationship, and really it was relationships that yes, drew me through thinking, and then the other levers that we've got really came from other things that came subsequently. I think metacognition, which seems to be bang on trend at the moment on Twitter, just really came from the understanding of the loss of definition as a learner. And I think there'll be a lot of students that will struggle to get back into the routines of school, let alone the routines of being a good learner. So yeah, those were the big levers that kind of pulled me into the idea of what other things we can do to facilitate our curriculum. And I think your first route through, particularly if you're a secondary head who's been battered by accountability measures for the last decade, your first route through will be, how can I fill the gaps in their knowledge? But actually that comes further down your list. It's vitally important, but if you don't put the other things in place, then students won't actualize to be able to acquire that knowledge.
And I think one of your levers is about community, and that very much reflects what you were saying earlier, doesn't it, about community? Yeah. And I think in shaping those levers, certainly with the 5th one, then we've got that idea of space, didn't we? That for some children, they're just going to need the space, maybe even to explore the space to remember what their school is, its layout, the routines.
I think the idea of a lever as well was, it is what it is, isn't it? But the idea was to think about what things you already have in place and make the most of those. So you already have, if you imagined your curriculum as a series of levers that facilitate change in a young person's life, then, we just have to really draw some of those things to the fore. So it isn't about necessarily doing more. It's not about heaps of extra stuff. It is about thinking about what you can do. And the community one I found particularly interesting because it's just about giving yourself the opportunity in your curriculum to listen to the needs of your community. Because I think a lot of communities will be affected in a lot of different ways. Yeah. I think so. From what I can see from the data, that London schools will be affected very differently to schools, rural schools in the Midlands. I think actually will be affected very differently. So it was never meant to be definitive, was it?
No, it's meant to be a series of signposts, and I hope people will see this whole thing of recovery curriculum. The recovery curriculum is a construct, and I like the word construct because it's part of the word construction. And I think what we're suggesting here is that we need to construct and even co-construct a curriculum with the children based on their needs. Listen to them, take their ideas and explore those ideas, those unresolved ideas, that if we don't resolve some of that, it will become baggage, and baggage will weigh them down, and we will lessen their life opportunities, not enhance them. And just going to that point about co-construction, co-production, one of your levers says transparent curriculum. Do you want to talk about that?
I think we did I toyed with calling it the co-constructed curriculum, but I think that in itself as a term carries a bit of baggage. But at its heart, really what we were thinking is that the kids know that they've missed school, and for whatever period of time that will be, they know they've missed a bit of school. Yeah. So they need an opportunity to say, well, these are things that I feel different about. So it's not just academic knowledge, but actually I am anxious about this because of this reason. Anxiety manifesting itself from a series of missed losses as we talked about earlier. Yeah. So they need an opportunity to articulate what they are concerned about. But then also the transparency element is then they need to know how the school is filling those gaps, is allowing the space for recovery. And I think that's really, really important. But that's also important for parents. The worst thing we could do is continually drift back to outcomes in this conversation. I think, the one thing we just need to keep away from now is talking about outcomes. That'll sort itself out. We need to return to our higher purpose as educators, don't we? Yeah. And we've sold ourselves short for a long time. Yeah.
So in some ways, maybe self-regulation has to be that the student, the child themselves, needs to know when that issue, that worry, is resolved for themselves, because we don't want to checklist this. It's not the approach at all. No. So how do you think that this will be implemented in schools? Maybe just talk us through, because I know you've been giving some thought to implementation in your school and talking to your senior leadership team. What strategies do you think for implementation will there be?
So we've been very over, the construct of a curriculum lever doesn't always mean it's the same thing at each time, does it? So, there is a lot of curriculum transparency going on. But that would include, we've built in, so we have learning principles. Lots of schools will have things like non-negotiables. They might have the TEEP cycle or building learning power. There's a raft of, just talking from a secondary perspective, and I know primary schools and special schools will have very similar things. So we've got sessions dedicated to getting kids back into those learning principles and understanding how they learnt prior to the time away, and actually probably drawing out what they've learnt about themselves as a learner while they've been working independently. Yeah. So we've built that time in the first week back. In the first day, it has a whole heap of space, social time. The kids are desperate for social time with each other. And I know with social distancing, we'll have to look at how we regulate that. But that doesn't mean we should deprive the young people of social interaction, because that's going to be so critical. That's the thing they miss the most. And I know, if we could all get teenagers to really value their education from an academic point of view, that'd be brilliant. But the thing they value the most is their friendships, really.
And for teenagers particularly, that's a huge deprivation, isn't it? Deprivation of liberty, really.
It is, yeah. So we've provided that space in there, and then our curriculum leaders are looking at their academic recovery curriculum, but again providing time in the first few weeks back to really consolidate what's been learnt, and for kids to say these are the things that I don't know or I couldn't do well while I was away, or that I didn't do because I claimed my laptop wasn't working, or a myriad of excuses, the dog ate my computer, etc. So we're building that in. I think really the challenge, so having done some work on this, the challenge that we will face is then a challenge that I would probably share with other leaders is, what does it look like a month in and a year in? And really the legacy of this, for all of us, is going to be from those students starting their educational experience now, those students who are in reception at the moment. There may be knock-on effects for a long time to come. So not losing sight of the process of recovery further down your journey. It's not just a 1 day or 1 week thing.
And have you allocated specific time in a school day to address any of that?
Yes, we have. But I think we've talked about it as an idea. But it's interesting, the further you go into the conversation, the more the old pressures, as I would refer to them as, come back. But no, we have built in, or we are exploring options to build in time. I'd say was a good way of looking at it. But I do think, particularly with our longer term planning, we're using a lot more of an evidence-based approach. So rather than having definitive answers about how we're going to do things like that, we've given ourselves strategic space, so to speak, to be nimble in our leadership and to look at what evidence we will have on that first day back and that first week back, to be able to facilitate what the kids need further in the future.
Yes, I think
we shouldn't, when we come back, we shouldn't think we know all the answers. We won't have it all planned. We've got to give ourselves the space.
We've been through a journey, the children have been through a journey that none of us have ever been through before. Yeah. We have no history of managing a pandemic in this way. We do not know what the impact is, particularly on British children, because in our lifetimes we have not known anything equivalent to this. I think we talked about too, and sort of our advice to schools who are saying what steps should we take. We looked at a kind of 3-phase model, didn't we, as well? There needs to be something for everyone. There needs to be that holistic response. Even those kids that seem well adjusted, they've heard very technical terms. Coronavirus itself is quite a weird word. We ought to go back and teach about that, just to make sure that if there is learning from this, painful as it may have been, it's embedded learning that they, in their lives ahead, can pull on and have a secure knowledge about. There'll be some mystery, because we're living with mystery every day. We see politicians trying to resolve issues for which they have no background, but none of us do. Even our scientific advisors are having to apply knowledge from other areas of science. So I think there's that bit about the holistic one. There's then the personalised responses, where you can see that child that you used to know as a happy, engaged learner who's become the disengaged learner. Yeah. So we might want to use something like an engagement profile to actually find out, are they still curious? Are they persistent? Are they investigative still? So that personalised response. But I think even beyond the early weeks of return, for some children, there will be deeper trauma. And maybe there we need to look at some deep, sustained support for that student. And maybe that will require a specific curriculum pathway for a time to resolve the issues. But if we know about the issues, we are charged professionally, I think, to resolve those issues. Yeah. So what do you think? I've just touched then about this is a new experience for all of us. What do you think this will mean for the children?
I think if we just went back to the curriculum transparency point, I think for the kids to understand that we have a recovery plan, a recovery curriculum in place for them, I think will be a really powerful thing. And for them to regain some confidence in this as professionals, because some kids might have had a real loss of attachment to their school, to their to their education. So
we should actually tell children that there is a recovery curriculum in place.
I would say that's the first step.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're all in it together, aren't we? And there is there's a sense of unity nationally, and we should try and use that as much as we can for the kids. I think that the fact that they know we're trying to recover will be really important. And I think them understanding that we are actively trying to restore their relationship with everyone there, that it's okay, that it's quite a powerful message that relationships break down for a whole heap of reasons, don't they?
Yeah.
Disagreement, conflict, actually just spending time apart. Or conducting your relationship virtually, not physically, might cause some deterioration of that. And then just understanding that we should restore those relationships, and that it's okay to accept that we have to restore relationships.
So how will you establish that equal footing, that co-construction, so they know that they have a voice to be able to say, look, I'm worried about, and how will the curriculum be a responsive curriculum?
I think that's quite multifaceted in its response. Once the relationship with their form tutor is re-established, once their relationships with their teachers are re-established, then they'll have the space and the opportunity to do that. I think currently in education, students are listened to more than probably they have been ever before. I think we went a little bit too far at points, but I think there is quite a rational student voice. I'm just taking the illustration you said about students wanting to understand about coronavirus because they've heard a lot of information secondhand. That you're absolutely spot on with that. When I spoke to our student parliament group this week, they really, really were keen for that to be the first thing that they did. They were really keen that they were taught about coronavirus properly by someone that might know what they were talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. More so than relationships, more so than getting your timetable. But, all of those things have been pushed back in the day. First thing they want to know is, are we going to be okay? What the hell is coronavirus? So if you think about our understanding, when the schools closed, our understanding has changed massively. We weren't talking about face masks, just as an illustration of that. Boris Johnson hadn't had coronavirus and nearly died from it.
Yeah. So we've got to explore a lot with the children, haven't we?
Yeah.
And make sure they do have voice in all of this. I was looking at something this morning online that was talking about worry jars where children can post their worries, because some children won't want to articulate them, won't know how to articulate them, but maybe can put down a few words. So we kind of need that space where they're not identified, the person who's asked that question, because they might be embarrassed. There's a lot of sensitivities to blend into this, but I like your phrase about nimble leadership. It invokes some strange images of school leaders I've known.
I think that might be my book to write in my retirement, Nimble Leadership. We all need our something leadership book, don't we? So
I can't recommend writing books in retirement as a man who's just been robbed of his retirement. But anyway. So
a man who doesn't want to retire, I think would be my...
Be quiet. I was going to ask you, Alan, because you've had some responses through the Evidence for Learning website and our new recovery curriculum forum that you've kindly put on there. What sort of things are schools saying to you that might reflect any of those themes Matthew and I have just discussed?
Yes, good question. I guess it's been a week since the think piece was launched, and it's remarkable how far it's already spread. Certainly when I speak with schools, there seems to be a very clear consensus that the social and emotional well-being of learners must be the priority when students and children return. And actually, it's been interesting to know that with everyone I've spoken with, there seems to be a universal view that every learner needs to be regarded as potentially vulnerable in the first instance. Certainly until, as a school, they're able to engage, screen, evaluate, and confirm otherwise. And actually on that point, I think most, if not everybody I'm speaking with is very much seeing engagement as being a critical tool in the recovery process, as you've already alluded to earlier. But I guess in summary, I think it's a very fair reflection, certainly on the feedback that I've received, that the simplicity of the model in terms of the 5 losses and the 5 levers seems to have really resonated with people. So I suppose looking forward in terms of how people might take the recovery curriculum forward, do you have any specific hopes or aspirations for how the ideas that you've both set out in the recovery curriculum might be picked up and taken forward by schools?
Having launched this, Matthew and I have passed on the ownership of it. We're happy to lead on discussions at this point and support people's thinking, but it's about people now owning this thinking for themselves. If they believe it, they have to deliver it. And it needs to be configured differently in different schools. Matthew's talked earlier about his experience as a secondary school principal. I know, Alan, that we've been lining up a primary colleague, primary head teacher, a special head teacher. We've got lead practitioners in a variety of settings who are going to share their insights. Fascinating, Alan, that you've already received a PowerPoint from a school showing their implementation and how they're going to deliver it in their setting. That is a week on. It seems that this idea has captured people's thinking. The DFE have begun some conversations with Matthew and I about this. It's there for what it's worth, and in some schools they'll decide it's not worth pursuing such notions as a recovery curriculum, but obviously we feel it's got merit.
Yes, from the feedback we've seen over the last week, it certainly appears to have merit. I'm conscious of time. Matt, are there any final thoughts or reflections that you'd like to close us out with?
I think just making sure everyone understands that it was, easy, just to reaffirm what Baz said, really, this wasn't written to be a definitive answer. We won't be writing a series of, elements of the curriculum, of a recovery curriculum. It's to promote thinking, and you might come up with your own set of levers that are completely different, or at least different. And when we think about impact, we just have to remember that the success of an education system isn't who leaves your building; it's who they are at the end of their lives. And when we talk about impact and success, that's where we were looking. It's kind of an assumed thing when we talk about education, Dad, isn't it? We look at it in its broadest sense and its broadest perspective, and outcomes are one measure of it, but actually success is far more broad than that.
Yes. Yes.
That's a powerful and very apt point for us to end on. Thank you. And thank you both for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of this conversation. I found it enlightening and very thought-provoking.
Thank you for your time, Alan. Thank you for the leadership you're offering to this as well.
Thank you for listening. Watch out over the coming days for new episodes where we'll be returning to the recovery curriculum. We've been recording some fascinating and insightful conversations with a number of colleagues throughout the UK, exploring their reflections and plans for the recovery process at their school. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and please do get in touch with feedback if you'd like to either suggest a topic for a future episode or if you'd like to be involved in any way. You can find more information about the recovery curriculum at www.recoverycurriculum.org. There's links to resources, reference materials, as well as video slide decks. Barry Carpenter's webpage is www.barrycarpentereducation.com, and the homepage for the podcast is www.learningshared.org. You can email us at learningshared@theteachercloud.net or tweet us at _learningshared. Finally, you're welcome to join the conversation via one of our online communities of practice. We've got groups on Facebook and LinkedIn. Details are on the recovery curriculum and LearningShared web pages. You can search for Recovery Curriculum as a group inside Facebook. So for now, thanks again for listening. Stay safe and be well.